This is my presentation, and I chose Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. In his trial in 1992, he shocked the world with his inhuman crimes. To this day, Dahmer's trial remains one of the most infamous in U.S. history, that being one of the main reasons that I chose this case, due to the interesting details. Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. From an early age, starting in childhood, Dahmer was isolated from his peers due to his fascination with dead animals and death in general. His first murder was Stephen Hicks at 18 in 1978. Hicks was a hitchhiker trying to get to a music concert that Dahmer picked up. Dahmer lured him back to his parents' empty home with the promise of alcohol. Dahmer killed Hicks and hid his body on the property, that being the start of his spree. Dahmer's killing spree continued for the next decade. He lured men, more often than not young and vulnerable, to his apartment and would drug, kill, and dismember them there. Dahmer murdered 7 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. The majority of them were from the marginalized communities like the LGBTQ and the minority groups. This raised question about police neglect. A way Dahmer lured the men and boys was through bribery. He promised alcohol and money, or even companionship to lure his victims. His crimes against these victims include necrophilic intercourse, which is intercourse with the dead, and cannibalism, which is the consumption of a human being. There were several victims who had escaped from Dahmer but were returned to him by the police themselves. The police failed to investigate the situation any further and just said it was a lover's quarrel or a good time that had gotten out of hand. On July 22, 1991, Tracy Edwards, who was one of Dahmer's victims, escaped. During his escape, Edwards was still partially handcuffed, and he flagged the police down and told them that he had just escaped a man trying to murder him. Edwards was the one who led the police back to Dahmer's apartment. While they were searching for the weapon that Tracy said Dahmer was trying to murder him with, they discovered so much more evidence. Dahmer invited the police into his apartment, which Edwards led them to, and found body parts, photographs, and tools for dismemberment. A deeper search revealed even more human remains, skulls, and preserved body parts. Although Dahmer tried to escape, he was arrested on the spot. Once in custody, Dahmer confessed in detail. He described his killings and his motives. He admitted that he could not control his compulsions. Dahmer was charged under Wisconsin state law with 15 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Another murder in Ohio was recognized but not tried. Prior to this conviction, he was convicted for second-degree sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. The trial began in January 1992, and the main question being asked was whether Jeffrey Dahmer was legally sane or not when he was committing these murders. Dahmer's defense argued insanity. They claimed that he was driven to do these crimes because of uncontrollable compulsions and mental illness. They presented a psychological testimony suggesting that Dahmer's necrophilic and cannibalism behavior were signs of a severe mental disorder. The prosecutors argued that Dahmer acted with clear intent and planning. That showed that he was sane and, for lack of better terms, responsible enough to be tried for his crimes. The evidence included physical remains, photographs, and Dahmer's own detailed confession. On January 13, 1992, Dahmer changed his plea from guilty but sane, leaving the jury to decide whether he was legally sane at the time of the killings. After 2 weeks of testimonies from psychiatrists and psychologists and witnesses, the jury deliberated for about 5 hours. The jury concluded that Dahmer did not suffer from a mental illness that kept him from knowing right from wrong. On February 17, 1992, the verdict was reached that Dahmer was found legally sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. The sentencing was imprisonment without parole, reaching a total of 941 years. Dahmer tried to appeal, challenging the rejections on his insanity defense, but was unsuccessful. During his time in prison, Dahmer expressed remorse, along with disturbing calmness, but he ultimately became a target amongst his inmates. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by one of his fellow inmates, Christopher Scarvers. Dahmer was targeted because it was discovered that Scarver was disgusted by his crimes. He claimed that Dahmer would taunt other inmates by shaping food into body parts, which only fueled his resentment. His case raised many debates among police accountability due to victims being returned to him without further investigation, and how marginalized victims were treated, and the insanity defense. Ultimately, I do agree with Dahmer's verdict and that decision to reject his insanity defense. I do not deny that the fact that Dahmer had severe psychological issues, but because of his evidence he showed, he was capable of planning, concealing, and controlling his actions. Those factors show that he is sane enough to take accountability for his crimes that he committed.